This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Do I need to put pants on for this? Do I need to put pants on for when Premiership ruckman Darcy Fort knocks on my door after winning the AFL Grand Final?
He dressed up in a silly costume at to quote Emerald Moon, a next day silly event.
Look, I don't quite understand AFL yet. I understand that as a Queenslander, now that the Lions have won, I need to become an AFL girly. It's no longer, we can't just ignore AFL anymore like we used to in the good old days.
Yeah.
But it's true, Tom, that when describing this story to you, I described it as the next day silly event. What is it? Is it Mad Monday? Is that what it's called?
Mad Monday. Yes.
So it's always, so tell me about this tradition and then we'll talk about the footballer dressing up as a Greens door knocker. Just give me some context.
Well, now we're going to run into the embarrassing limits of my knowledge, but my understanding is that
you're laughing at me. Oh. So funny.
The master has become the student. When you win the AFL Grand Final, then the next day you get to celebrate for a week and do a big parade and all this stuff.
Which is always on Monday. Okay.
The next day is, the match is on a Saturday. I assume you do lots of drugs on the Sunday, and then on the Monday it's Mad Monday.
And you dress up.
And I guess so, yes, people dress up. I don't know about tradition, but apparently, yes, the Brisbane Lions embrace that with gusto. This Monday just gone. And yes, Darcy Fort, who I think is like quite a big deal. And I followed him on Instagram and he followed me back. So that's the thing.
What did I see? I Googled him and it refers to him as like a big man or a tall boy. Like there's some specific word that they used to describe him that I think was actually like an AFL term. And they were like, due to a proliferation of big boys on the Geelong team, like he wasn't that useful, but he's like fucking 2 meters tall. Like he's very, very high. And yeah, there's this photo. The only thing we can find is this photo of him walking around Brisbane, and he's got a dark green bucket hat and a dark green shirt and just some classic, beige shorts. He's carrying a clipboard and he's got the Greens logo on his shirt and his hat. He's a Greens door knocker. He's going door knocking, baby. He's about to touch door.
And to clarify, like his teammates are dressing up as Spider-Man. They're dressing up as dinosaurs. They're dressing up as crazy, double denim, wearing crazy shirts. As heroes, modern heroes.
What greater hero than a door knocker? And look, I would never, divulge confidential information, but I hear on the grapevine that perhaps him dressing up as a Greens door knocker could be based on a real life experience of his, one that might have been positive. I don't know.
The screenshot that we've got here is from 7 News, I think, and the caption they have for it is Premiership ruckman Darcy Fort just wants to ask some questions.
That's pretty funny. I like that they identify, and I guess because he's put the Greens logo on it, it is identifiable. And then some people were whinging because they're like, we would never wear a Greens shirt out door knocking, because everyone knows that's always it's a bit weird when someone shows up to a door knock and they're wearing a Greens shirt and you're like, you don't look like an old person. But I think it's probably necessary. I think it's well done. It is necessary. Like it's elegant, it's subtle, it hits all the points. He's got a hat, he's got a clipboard. Well, what do you need?
It's demure, I'd say.
Do you mind me asking, have you ever considered winning a premiership before? That's what he could ask. You could say, well, this premiership is really important because we've got an incredible opportunity to be the first time that the Brisbane Lions have won the premiership in however long. Do you think that, we'll have your support this time?
Maybe just AFL teams should just door knock to just sign up more supporters. Be like, hi, I'm from Collingwood and we fucking suck. Have you considered lending us your support?
But the bottom line is this: the Greens hate the Australian people. They hate the concept of the nation state. They want to see the populace dumbed down so that when they rise up to be the elitist leaders, they have absolute control. And everything about them is almost evil. They are really bad people. And if you listen to their rhetoric, listen carefully to what they say, you wouldn't feed them. But of course, Albanese will get them.
Of course, we are speaking in metaphors for those that are getting ready to write their letter of complaint. We are speaking in political metaphors.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. But the point is that they hate Australia. They just hate Australia.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hey team, it is Serious Danger. Once again, the podcast about green politics in Australia. Yay!
Yay!
Yay, yay indeed. It is made possible with the help of the Green Institute, produced by Michael the Griffin. Oh, it's not an official Greens Party podcast. Just got to clarify that. Or an official Brisbane Lions podcast, to be totally clear.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay, whatever. I'm Tom Ballard. I'm coming to you from Sweden.
Sweden. Yeah. What does
Good
it do?
enough.
What's in Sweden? What's the go there? Is that IKEA?
Yes, it's IKEA,
Nice.
meatballs, and chefs. That's basically the Swedish way.
Nice. I'm Emerald Moon. I'm coming to you from Yoga and Terrible Country in Manjin. And this week we are on the show discussing the horrific unfolding situation in Lebanon and the attempts to ban anti-genocide protests, and then a quick update on the fight against the big supermarkets. Is the government doing enough? How evil are they? The answer, very evil. Quick thank you before we get into it to our new patrons, Lauren, Andrew, and Ben. Thank you so much for signing up on Patreon. It's $3 a month, or however much you choose to contribute. You get access to bonus episode every fortnight. That's right. Every couple of weeks, you could have another one of these, and we do little deep dives. We do reading series. We're reading Inside the Greens. We do cool interviews, watching parties, etc. This week, we just put out a Patreon episode in conversation with Nasser Mashni, the president of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, reflecting on the upcoming 1-year anniversary of 7th of October. Quite a moving, and I don't know. He's an impressive man, and yes, thinking about the closeness. Like if this was something that was so central to your life, what the last year would have been like. It's been so kind of omniscient for all of us. But yes, to live the last year as a Palestinian, truly something. So definitely recommend listening to that chat if you're a patron subscriber, and if you're not, consider becoming one. It helps us keep the show going and pay our producer Mike. One more final plug. We keep saying it, but before we get into it, don't forget about the New South Wales live shows in November. Saturday, the 23rd of November, we are in Newcastle. Sunday, the 24th of November, we are in Sydney. We're going to be there in Newcastle coinciding with the Rising Tide blockade. And then we're heading down to Newtown, and we would love to see all of you there. Tickets are on sale at seriousdangerpod.com.
When these people are out chanting from the river to the sea, what they're saying is that they want to exterminate an entire race of people. Now, there should be no support for that in our country whatsoever. People who are out supporting, glorifying leaders of terrorist organisations, they should be held to account.
All right, obviously the number one most horrifying story that everyone's talking about this week is the escalating conflict. The word escalations had a real workout this week, I must say. Escalating conflict in Israel, Lebanon and Iran. First question, Emerald Moon, is this World War III? Is that what's happening? Because sometimes I see a headline and I go, maybe that's happening now.
What is the threshold for it becoming a world war? Is it when white countries start getting involved or start getting involved? I don't know.
It's a good point. I mean, even in the world wars, not everyone in the world was involved. That's just how we sort of thought about it, because it took up, involved heaps of Europe, I suppose, which is, yes, we consider to be the world. I tell you, what counts as a war anymore? It seems like no one declares war anymore. I mean, we've talked before about, of course, Israel-Hamas war doesn't really make sense if we think of a war as between two nation states fighting, so that doesn't make sense. But then no one declares war anymore, and there seems to be no rules of war. It's just people shooting rockets at other people heaps with US backing, and it's all just tackling terror or keeping people safe or self-defense and bullshit, right?
Probably something that we should ask my sister Georgia. If anyone remembers my sister Georgia, the international humanitarian lawyer that we had on at one point talking about AI, she would probably, I feel like there probably is a legal definition for when you are in war. I'm almost certain that that's a thing. But yes, it feels as though everyone just disregards the rules of law completely now, and particularly Israel.
Yes, big time. Well, I remember, everyone made such fun of the phrase war on terror, okay, which was this very convenient phrase. And then even the Iraq war, I mean, yes, did America actually ever officially say we are at war with Iraq, or were they just we're invading there now?
Yeah, it's not war unless it's from the X region. Otherwise, it's just sparkling terror or escalation. Otherwise it's just sparkling conflict.
God. All right, there's obviously lots to talk about. We assume that people listening to this podcast are also reading the news and sort of across the kind of developing situation. There's also a very high chance that what we're saying right now will be eclipsed by events between now and we actually release it on Sunday, but we'll do our best. We want to talk about Lebanon. We want to talk about the actual conflict and the sort of escalation in the past week and the recent domestic ramifications. How is your Hezbollah knowledge? I'll be honest, mine was pretty sparse. I'm trying to build it up a little bit, And what's your take or your understanding of exactly what went down over this past week? What are the big takeaways for you, would you say?
Very limited. I'm hoping you will tell me, this is, again, a somewhat shameful thing to admit, but, I am focused very much on a Queensland election, and that's not because I think that that's necessarily more important, but I'm like, this is the job I have to do, and so I kind of deliberately shut out a lot of other things. So I'm aware that really horrible things are happening and that Israel is quite in earnest commenced an invasion of Lebanon, right? But that's, I don't know details. No, I heard that there was a somewhat successful, a kind of retaliation by Hezbollah into Israel, but
Yes, well, everyone's trying their best, I'd say, and Iran's getting involved, but of course they don't have the backing of the US military and billions of dollars in funding and the technology to make a real dent in Israel's defenses, to be fair. Full credit to Israel's defenses. When you get billions of dollars from the US every year, it really does help you build up quite a good defense force. All right, well, Hezbollah, we should start there. They are a Shiite Muslim political party and militant group based in Lebanon. They were formed in the early 1980s to fight Israel's invasion and occupation of southern Lebanon. They are backed by Iran. You often hear the term Iran-backed for both them and the Houthis and basically anyone as a way, the US will use that term to imply they're therefore evil.
Yeah.
They are prescribed as a terrorist organization in its entirety by the US, Australia, and most Western states. Interestingly, New Zealand and the EU only designate Hezbollah's military wing as a terrorist organization. New Zealand used to have that same position on Hamas. They actually only designated the military wing of Hamas as terrorists and the political wing as not terrorist. They changed that this year, though, back in February, citing the October 7th attacks.
Yeah. And this was the subject of that question that the ABC journalist, sorry if I'm skipping ahead, but this week this ABC journalist was asking Peter Dutton, well, what constitutes a terror, when you refer to Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, what does that mean? How does something meet the criteria or the threshold to become a terrorist organization? And his response to that was to attack this journalist effectively instead of answering the question.
What, sorry?
What determines the fact that Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation, even though many...
Where are you from, I'm sorry? Which organisation?
ABC.
ABC. So what's the question from the ABC, just to be very clear?
I just wanted to find out because groups have commented on the...
No, but you asked about the listing of the organisation. I just didn't understand that question, sorry.
So...
this is a question from Canberra, is it? You're reading it from your phone?
No. So I just wanted to ask... in terms of looking into that for the investigation, you've asked the Prime Minister and the Minister to direct the ANRB in its investigation.
No, that wasn't the question you asked. What was the question you asked?
I just wanted to understand.
No, you asked the question about the listing, so I just want you to just ask that question again.
If you could just sort of explain what determines something of a terrorist organisation.
Well, I had presumed up until this point at least that the ABC supported the government's laws, and the government has passed laws supported on a bipartisan basis, but not by the ABC, it seems, in relation to the prescribing or the listing of a terrorist organisation. Hezbollah, under Australian law, is a listed terrorist organisation. Now, if the ABC doesn't support that, they should be very clear about it, because I think that's quite a departure. But you asked me why our country has listed Hezbollah. They're a terrorist organisation. They organise terrorist attacks. And if that is not clear to the ABC, then I think the ABC is in greater trouble than even I first imagined.
What an absolute dude. Just
so much to unpack in there. The way that he asks her to repeat the question and then every time she tries, he just interrupts her again.
Yeah,
that's
great.
Just really remarkable. The argument that when he's like, well, I thought the ABC would support the government, which is not the role of the ABC, actually. That's not if you're assuming that, that's kind of concerning in itself. And then it's like, did we almost get an answer there at the end? Like, is the answer they organize terrorist attacks? Like, that's the only thing that he said that somewhat answered it. But no, it's just this circular, it's like a tautological whatever. He's like, well, why do we designate them as a terrorist organization? Because they're a terrorist organization.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for getting involved.
Fuck that guy.
This is ABC reporter Anushri Sood. And actually, like, that's the video that was doing the rounds on social media and sort of was turned into the story. The start that's been cut off, this is from the transcript that was reported by Sky News, is kind of much more clarifying, I think. In the transcript, the reporter says, with Hezbollah, you're saying being responsible for the deaths of women and children, groups have commented on the hypocrisy of that situation because there are no bans currently on Israeli flags being raised, despite 45,000 people dying at the hands of the Israeli government. And then Dutton says, Israel is a democracy. It's not run by a terrorist organization. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. They're listed as a terrorist organization. And if people are in favor of a terrorist organization, they should declare it and authorities can deal with them. And then we go into the rest of the video that we normally saw.
Yeah, that was the transcript that I saw. Yeah, but it suits Dutton to not include that, right? Because what he's trying to do in that exchange is frame it as, oh, you're trying to debate whether Hezbollah are terrorists.
Yes.
Like, you're trying to debate the merits of Hezbollah when actually it was a question about Israel, but they don't want to talk about whether Israel should, would potentially meet the same criteria to be designated as a terrorist organization.
Yes. And that was sort of the angle that Sky News was going with, and basically the implication from Sky News' outrage and indeed the right-wing outrage is that even that line of questioning to even propose or purport in any way whatsoever there's any equivalence here is obviously evil and anti-Semitic and completely disgraceful for the public broadcaster to be involved with. Now, I think you could maybe make the argument that potentially, and I don't know anything about her as a journalist or what her background was going into this question in particular, but you could sort of say that, this is information that she could ascertain and use. You can still use the question and information to challenge Peter Dutton on this particular question. And it did sort of seem to sort of fall apart a little bit in the interrogation back and forth. But it's a completely valid lining of question. This is what I found out.
Yeah.
But it's a completely legitimate line of questioning, right? The actual facts, if people are interested, Division 102 of the Criminal Code Act of 1995 provides that for an organisation to be listed as a terrorist organisation, the Minister for Home Affairs must be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the organisation, 1, is directly or indirectly engaged in, preparing, planning, assisting in, or fostering the doing of a terrorist act, or 2, advocates the doing of a terrorist act. Now, Australia only listed Hezbollah's external security organisation, that is its military wing, as a proscribed terrorist organisation since 2003. We only listed the entirety of Hezbollah, including its political wing, in 2021, in December 2021. So that's quite a recent change. And as we mentioned, these other countries having different listings for Hezbollah at least suggests that there is debate or there's an open question about which sections of Hezbollah should be listed. But again, under that definition, if you are directly or indirectly engaged in preparing, planning, assisting in, or fostering the doing of a terrorist act, or advocates the doing of a terrorist act, I'm sorry, the IDF or Mossad should absolutely be in their category because they just blew up fucking pages and killed little girls and innocent civilians as an act of terror in Lebanon. Like, we've just seen this with our own eyes and we know they did it. But no, of course you can't possibly do that.
An indiscriminate, disproportionate attack that, like, they have killed so many civilians. But it's not terrorism unless it's brown.
Jesus. Peter Dutton, no good. We've said it before and we'll say it again here at Serious Danger.
That's right. We're not afraid. We're not afraid on this podcast to condemn Peter Dutton. Pretty brave.
So a little bit of background about what's been happening to bring us to where we are at the moment. We'll go back to October the 8th of last year. Okay, Hezbollah and Israel began exchanging fire on the border immediately after the October 7th attacks. Hezbollah said it launched guided rockets and military artillery at 3 military posts in Sheba Farms, a border region, in solidarity with Palestinians. Sheba Farms, which is claimed by Lebanon, was seized by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. And they'd been trading blows ever since. And this is how it was often reported over this past week, that, Hezbollah and Israel have been going back and forth and sort of they've been fighting at each other like equals. Not quite the reality of the situation. From October the 7th until September the 6th, of the 7,845 attacks exchanged between the two forces, about 82% have been carried out by Israeli forces, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, AGCLED, which is quite a reputable organisation.
Okay.
At least 646 people in Lebanon were killed in that period in Israeli attacks. So pretty one-sided, I reckon you'd probably say.
Well, yes, that usually is the case because, as you say, when you've got enormous financial and political backing from the United States and other significant world powers, it makes it pretty hard to exchange blows with you.
Yes, it also makes it hard to paint yourself both as this victim that's under existential threat, but also you have incredible weapons and can fight back almost every single attack that comes your way.
Yeah.
Other escalations. In April this year, an Israeli attack on Syria destroyed the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing 13 people. People might remember this. 2 weeks after that, in response, Iran responded by launching a barrage of missiles and drones on Israel. Most of them were shot down by the US, the UK, France, and Jordan. Again, another insane moment over the past 12 months, the outrage that Iran would send rockets at Israel after Israel had literally destroyed a diplomatic mission in another sovereign country. That's totally fine. Israel's allowed to do that. It's no worries.
I thought countries had the right to defend themselves.
No.
That's so important.
The right kind of countries, please. Also in July, Israel killed Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh with an airstrike. Now, this guy was a very famous, long-standing leader of Hamas, the resistance movement. The ICC issued a warrant for his arrest alongside the warrant, or the prosecutor rather requested a warrant for his arrest alongside the warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest rather. He was that guy. But most importantly, he was like a very big force in the ceasefire negotiations that were maybe getting close to maybe doing something. Before they could close those negotiations, Israel fucking killed him with a rocket.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it makes it pretty hard to negotiate a ceasefire.
This is de-escalation through escalation, Emerald. You wouldn't understand, but it's very
I wouldn't. No, I really don't, actually. But hey.
So that kind of brings us the major events that bring us to September. And this is when shit has got really intense. On the 17th of September, Israel announced a new war goal to return the tens of thousands of Israelis who had been displaced in the north because of the fighting between Israel and Lebanon. This is a new war aim they have. Okay. Later that day, we get the Pages explosion across Lebanon, killing 13 people, including children, injuring literally thousands of others. And, of course, this was targeted at Hezbollah leaders. But as you mentioned, completely indiscriminate, a war crime, a terrorist act.
Yeah.
Next day, you had more communication devices, including walkie-talkies, explode, killing 14 and wounding 450 people. We didn't really get to talk about this on the show so much because we were looking at other stuff. But I mean, it was horrific and shocking. And I suppose I'm interested in what you think the real reason is for this massive escalation that Netanyahu has arrived on. Is it really them just settling on this new war aim of returning Israelis who had to flee because of the Hezbollah-Israeli conflict, or is something else going on here?
Well, I don't know. Maybe you're hinting at something in particular. Like, to me, it just seems as though they will continue shifting the goalposts because their goal ultimately is like just limitless expansion of their colonial project, right? Like they just want to claim as much territory as they possibly can, and they've already killed a shitload of people. And, when things are so destabilized, they're going to take advantage of that and take advantage of the backing that they have around the world to continue what they've been doing. But, I mean, what do you think?
Yes, I think that's totally true. Bigger picture-wise, I think in the more short-term, cynical political interests of Benjamin Netanyahu, it's in his benefits to perpetuate the war. Once the war is over, it's generally considered that he'll be out as prime minister and will have to face his corruption charges, potentially go to prison.
Right.
He has enjoyed a surge of support in recent months. He was tanking. He was wildly unpopular. That has sort of really turned around for him a lot. And the only people that are more popular than him are people like Naftali Bennett, who's significantly to his right. So, imagine that. People more right-wing than Benjamin Netanyahu.
Good.
And Naftali Bennett was like, the big problem with our response after October 7th is we didn't kill enough Palestinians quickly enough, and we weren't really efficient in that. So So those are the kind of political pressures facing Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's just made it very clear that making a ceasefire agreement is not what they want to do, because they don't want a two-state solution. Yeah. They want to perpetuate war because that makes them feel good and, as you say, serves their project. So Israel's then bombing the shit out of Lebanon, attacking residential buildings in downtown Beirut, killing Hezbollah leaders, yes, but also killing civilians, in some cases wiping out entire families in residential complexes. On September 23rd, Israel calls on residents of southern Lebanon to leave only hours before blanketing the area with more than 1,300 airstrikes. Those strikes kill at least 558 people, including women, children, and healthcare workers, and injure more than 1,800, according to Lebanon's Ministry of Health. This is the highest single-day death toll in Lebanon in decades.
Yep.
Incredible reports of course, Israel saying, hey, we warn people before we bomb stuff. Classic. We warn people, hey, if you live near a place where Hezbollah is secretly hiding rockets, you should leave that house.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Great tip. Thank you, Israel. Since then, we've had hundreds and hundreds of airstrikes from Israel. Hezbollah has tried to respond in kind, but as we've discussed, is unable to do anything like the damage that Israel can. And of course, Israel protects itself with its state-of-the-art technology. In just 4 days, Israeli forces killed 700 people in Lebanon, including 50 children and 94 women. Israel has repeatedly rejected any notion of a ceasefire from the UN. Benjamin Netanyahu told the UN General Assembly that Israel is winning on multiple fronts. And on September 28th, Israel manages to kill Hassan Nasrallah, who is Hezbollah's leader, has been Hezbollah's leader for the past 32 years. And of course, this was also a massive story of, many people consider it to be a huge escalation and a huge turning point in the conflict, because this guy was very famous. Hezbollah is a very big deal. And it's very hard to see how anyone could possibly argue that this is going to get us any closer to peace in any way whatsoever.
Yes.
So that was pretty much bringing us to the start of this week. And then on Monday, the IDF announced a ground incursion into southern Lebanon, also described as a ground offensive. I think people have actually named it as an invasion now, but there would seem to be a period there where the I word was a bit verboten, apparently.
Cool.
That is, of course, them invading a sovereign country, but, who gives a shit about that kind of thing when Israel does it? We've had IDF forces clashing with Hezbollah forces in Lebanon. On Tuesday, Iran got involved. It launched 180 missiles at military targets in Israel. They said that 90% of its attack were effective. The US says it was defeated and ineffective. They said they were doing this in retaliation for recent Israeli killings of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders and aggression in Lebanon and Gaza. Israel and the US have, of course, said, we're going to respond. Of course, they've got to respond. Everyone's got to respond to retaliation. That's crucial.
Got to respond, and then you can respond back, and then we'll respond.
Well, the 1.2 million people in Lebanon have been displaced by all this. And if you think that Israel's forgotten about Gaza while focused on these conflicts, you'd be totally wrong. Israeli forces stepped up their attacks on the Gaza Strip overnight and into Wednesday, killing scores of people at several schools and homes across the enclave and at an orphanage sheltering displaced civilians, local officials and the Gaza Health Ministry said.
Wow. So glad they're still fighting terrorism. Thanks.
So glad they're not the terrorists either. They're doing this for truth and justice and freedom.
That's the good guys, right? Yeah.
I mean, I know that's a huge amount of horrific information about a truly horrific situation. Is there anything to be said? Have you been surprised by the reaction to all this in the news here in Australia or by the US generally?
No, I mean, I haven't been surprised. What would I be surprised by? Have you been surprised?
No, I mean, the same hypocrisy and doublespeak that we've been experiencing throughout this entire conflict was on full display. Leaders who, and I think, I can't do it much better than Vulgar Boatman did on Twitter.
Vulgar Boatman.
Who quote tweeted, of course, Senator Penny Wong said, "We condemn Iran's dangerous escalation." That is their response to their rocket attacks. A quote with an article of Penny Wong in October of 2023 saying, "Israel's order to cut food and water from Gaza, difficult to judge from afar," says Foreign Minister Penny Wong.
We would never judge from afar.
But Vulgar Boatman says, "You have the moral standing of Hitler's dog," which I don't know, maybe. I don't know why tie the name of Hitler's dog in there. I think he did, yes.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think we should hold him responsible.
Yeah.
Or her.
Or her. Or them.
But yes, this all these leaders who said, "Oh, it's very complicated over there. We couldn't possibly judge the actions of Israel. Are they doing war crimes? Who knows?" As soon as Iran does anything like this, it's very clear. The moral case is very clear.
Even when there's credible evidence that they are attempting to carry out a genocide, well, we can't. Hey, we need to step slowly, step carefully, let these things be investigated. But yeah, Iran, Hezbollah does anything, and we know exactly how we feel about it. We know exactly what it is. It's funny, isn't it?
Simple, black and white. Oh, and Russia sucks too, by the way. We definitely know that they're doing war crimes, but no follow-up questions, please.
Some things are simpler than others.
So, if you're appalled by this, as you should be if you're a human being with a beating heart and you're listening to this fucking podcast, if you want to do anything about that, then I'm sorry, you really shouldn't, and you're a bad person, and that's
also terrorism.
Seems that way. We had this week Flaggate unfolding. The Australian Federal Police has launched a task force to investigate at least 9 allegations of prohibited symbols being displayed in Victoria in response to Hezbollah flags being flown at pro-Palestine and Lebanon protests on Sunday. In a statement, the AFP said Operation Advana would investigate the display of prohibited symbols while potentially inciting or advocating violence or hatred based on race and religion.
So... Sorry, is this the laws that, like, when they were like, hey, we're going to crack down on Nazism, and the Liberals were like, yeah, ban the swastika, and some people were like, sure, but it'll probably just end up getting used against leftists more commonly. Is that what we're talking about here?
This is exactly the laws that were passed at the end of last year, yes. Okay. Yes, have yet to be enforced in any way. That were exactly brought in with that kind of context of trying to ban the Nazi salute and the swastika being displayed by the evil racist far right, are now apparently going to be rolled out in this particular instance. And it's so serious, the AFP has set up a fucking task force.
Advana.
I don't know what that's reference to. I mean, look, it's okay. First of all, we should say, and I felt this even preparing the story, right? Like researching all those facts about the death and the destruction and the children and the orphanages being bombed by a state that we are an ally with and armed to, like, and the unfolding genocide before our very eyes. Like, just putting yourself in the brain space of like examining those facts and then bringing yourself to what's the main thing that people wanted to talk about this week was some fucking flags being displayed by people who are out on the streets protesting against that same horror. What a joke of a country. What a joke of a media culture. And it's really important to say that the focus on some fucking flags, as if this is the greatest crime of the century, is a total distraction and a disgrace.
Quite pathetic.
Having said that, I don't know. Do you have strong feelings about whether or not people should fly Hezbollah flags?
No, I don't have strong feelings about it. I think that's the thing. Like, I don't really care. I probably wouldn't, but like, no, I think it's a stupid use of these laws. And I think, as you say, it is a stupid thing to focus on and a very cynical thing to focus on. And I think it's just exactly the same kind of thing that we see every time from, the mainstream media and political class when they don't want to deal with the actual substance of an issue. In this case, a fucking like a horrific war and genocide unfolding before our eyes, is to be like, but what about the discourse and the civility of the rhetoric that's happening? And most crucially, is it supported by the Greens?
Yes. Our own Hezbollah here in Australia.
Yeah.
Soon to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation, I'm sure.
They would if they fucking would.
I mean, I think the interesting wrinkle here is under the law, the display of prohibited symbols is outlawed when carried with intent to incite hatred or violence. Now, I mean, that's really fucking murky legal territory, particularly as people were, my understanding was, I'm sure, and I can't speak to the soul of lots of people displaying these particular flags, but the leader of Hezbollah had just been murdered, had just been killed with an extrajudicial killing by Israel, a state that is also, very likely before our very eyes carrying out a genocide, a rogue state, we might say. Hezbollah is a massive organization that, yes, has a military wing, that, yes, has certainly committed terrorist acts. I think that's a reasonable description of what Hezbollah is. But they also have like seats in parliament and they run huge bits of Lebanese society, right? Like they actually, I think they run swimming pools. Like it's literally at that level that Hezbollah is in charge of lots of what life is like in Lebanon. Yeah. And so there are lots of reasons why somebody would be displaying those flags that isn't an intent to incite hatred or violence, certainly against Jewish people, which is the implication you get from some elements of the Zionist lobby and the particular pearl clutching on this issue. That's what they're really focused on, right? That anyone showing this flag must therefore hate Jewish people and is trying to make the streets unsafe for Jewish Australians.
Yeah, it's similar to, I think, wasn't it Nasa that was saying in our conversation that it's like Sinn Féin and the IRA effectively in Ireland. And yes, it's as though the support or carrying of a flag or any kind of symbol representing Sinn Féin were that then you were accused of supporting terrorism, like when that is a party that contests elections and, participates in Parliament. You're right, like that. Yeah, the conflation is just wild and like not critiqued in any way by either major party.
Yeah, I mean, David Spears was talking to a legal expert, I think from the Law Council, about these laws on the Insiders podcast this week. And this guy was just a bit like, look, it could be against the law. We'll need to look into it. The police have charged this particular 19-year-old woman, I believe, or was trying to
19-year-old woman.
Take your own. Yes, for showing the flag. But yes, the other bigger question of like, is this really where our resources are going? Is this the greatest outrage? Of course
I do have this thing where I'm like, sometimes I think that I would like to know what the connections of the people carrying the flag are to Hezbollah, to Lebanon, to Iran, wherever. Because this is when you're like, do you have an opinion on the carrying of the flags? I'm like, well, I wouldn't like carry the flag because I don't have a personal reason to do so. And I think if they don't have a personal connection to it, I do wonder if sometimes it's almost a bit of edgelording. Like it's, you think like people, young leftists who have maybe got involved with some of the socialist groups at uni and think that they just want to be as edgy as possible and really challenge the status quo by focusing on these groups and support for these groups. Like I don't know if I am articulating this well enough, but you know what I mean, that it is it's a bit like, okay, why are you really doing this? But some people would have a genuine, as you say, a legitimate connection to this country, to this group, whether it's familial or cultural, whatever it is. And I don't think that they should be punished for that. I also am just like, why, what are your reasons for doing this? Not that I support them being prosecuted or persecuted politically the way they have been,
Yeah. The slippery slope argument is so true. I mean, like, if these prosecutions go through, I mean, it's not hard to imagine a world in which the Palestine flag is also entered as a hate symbol. I mean, it's already considered that way by a bunch of truly batshit crazy Zionists and organizations. Like, they get triggered or they feel unsafe when they see the flying of the Palestine flag. Yes, this is certainly on the list of symbols they'd love to ban. Same goes for, the Israeli flag. I don't object to anybody waving the Israeli flag. I might critique it. You might have a conversation, but there might be lots of different reasons why people do that. But in a free and open society, people should be able to display those kind of symbols. And we shouldn't be using the fucking state and the national Commonwealth security forces to prosecute people for doing so. It's wild.
Yeah, yeah.
Police should focus on their real job, which is stopping people protesting at all before we can even start busting out these not naughty flags.
We need to prevent crime before it happens.
Yes, preventative measures. Earlier this week, police in New South Wales have taken court action to prevent pro-Palestine rallies from going ahead in Sydney this weekend, arguing their application for protest permits should be rejected on public safety grounds. Now, they were trying to stop rallies happening on either October the 6th, this Sunday, today, that this podcast comes out, or tomorrow, the anniversary of the attacks. And it's all for very normal, non-racist reasons. This is a quote from Assistant Police Commissioner Peter McKenna. He said there had been a change in tone in the protests since the war spread to Lebanon. Since the uptake of the Lebanese community coming into the protest with the Palestine Action Group, we felt a different undertone within the protest group. It is described to me by the police on the ground as a more aggressive feeling at the moment, and we're very concerned by it.
Where's that like racism watchdog on Twitter that just quote tweets things and barks? That's what I'm feeling right now. It's like ruff, 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 ruff.
In cross-examination by barrister Arjun Chabra, appearing for the protesters, the Assistant Commissioner agreed the Lebanese community had been involved since the protest started a year ago. Oh, that's interesting. That's weird.
Yeah, okay. But like they're like, Lebanese people started getting involved and then we felt uncomfortable.
We felt unsafe.
And that's their justification.
We, the police, didn't feel safe. We need safe spaces.
Okay.
Just blatant racism, or saying it out loud. That guy's not been media trained very well, I'd suggest. He's supposed to make that a bit more.
I mean, okay.
All right, now, since all this, the police have come to an agreement. People will probably know, protest organisers, they are going ahead. In Sydney, there was a big rally going through the streets. They changed the route to avoid going near the Great Synagogue, which was considered provocative. Protest organisers agreed to that. We could discuss how sort of ridiculous that is, how that plays into the same trope that this rally is in any way targeted or hostile to Jewish Australians, which is ridiculous, which plays into the broader social unrest or, attacking social cohesion that we're talking about. So that's wild. And there is still going to be a silent vigil on Monday, which I believe is much more a mourning of the loss of all lives in this conflict since October the 7th. Is that an acceptable compromise, do you think, where things have landed?
Yeah. So just to clarify, was it initially scheduled for Monday the 7th of October? Or because what I have seen in the media is this discussion about whether you should be protesting on the 7th of October.
Well, yes, that is part of the conversation. But no, the New South Wales Police tried to stop a rally going ahead on Sunday, the 6th of October, because it was so close, I guess, to the 7th, and because
it was so close.
So tense right now, apparently, yes.
Yeah.
Truly. Yeah. And look, and the police went straight to the court injunction, right? Like they've reached this negotiation with the protest organisers, seem to have come to a mutually beneficial position, I suppose, but just went straight to, no, fucking shut it down. This isn't going to be safe. Really crazy.
Yeah.
And completely anti-democratic, completely backed in by Labor Premier Chris Minns and the goddamn Prime Minister.
Yeah. I understand that, obviously in this instance, as usual, the Greens were saying, hey, just a second, this is probably not so good. We should be a democratic country that allows people to protest peacefully, and they were happy with the outcome of the protest being allowed to go ahead. But as you say, otherwise, Albanese was out there saying, no, you shouldn't be able to protest. And my understanding was Albanese was focusing on the proximity to 7th of October.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's sort of that's sort of his focus of his critique. It's sort of mixed in with the flag conversation as well, I suppose. But it wasn't clear whether Anthony Albanese was concerned about protests happening on the 6th, on Sunday the 6th. But again, the New South Wales Police were certainly going for, and Albanese backed that general decision in, I suppose.
Yeah.
The craziest quote, I think, comes from Victorian Labor Premier Jacinda Allen. She said, protests shouldn't be happening on the 7th. This is a very traumatic anniversary for all those involved in the conflict. Whilst everyone has a right to protest peacefully, groups should reconsider the need to protest next week in respect to the grief it will cause Jewish, Israeli, Muslim, Palestinian and Lebanese communities.
Oh, such a class. This is, God, politics is awful. When you just add the names, you just add things to the list, and then you're like, they write the statement and then they're like, hang on, we'll just add in, do you want to just put in Muslim, Palestinian, Lebanese as well?
I can't tell whether she means the protest will cause the grief or she means the anniversary will cause the grief. I don't know.
To me, I think she is saying the protest will cause grief. Yeah, because there's nothing else that could possibly cause grief that's happening right now in the real world.
The grief. And I'll tell you what helps grief, standing in solidarity with tens of thousands of other people who are joining you on the streets and saying, this is fucking wrong. This is wrong and we will not put up with this. This is not what we accept. We want this violence to end. We want to apply pressure to our political leaders to stop more grief affecting more people, for God's sake.
Yeah. No, as always, it is the words and the symbols that are the worst and the most hurtful, and not the bombs.
Last question on this. The protest organisers, this is in New South Wales, thankfully in Victoria we don't have this bullshit like permit system and it's just a New South Wales thing, so it didn't happen. The protest organisers have agreed that no flags, portraits or symbols connected to a prohibited terrorist organisation will be displayed. Now, I don't know if they can or should guarantee that, really. That seems like you're setting yourself up to have a fucking fail in that respect.
But I guess if that's what you said, maybe it's you promised that in order to go ahead and then ask for forgiveness. I don't know. You took all best efforts.
There's probably a difference between what the flags that the protest organisers are responsible for. And they say, look, we weren't displaying the Hezbollah flag, maybe, but we can't control everything that people bring. I don't know. Look, solidarity to the protest organisers who persevered that, who were like stood up in court and said, fuck you, New South Wales Police, we're going to do it, who said they'd do the protest anyway if they didn't get the permits, and to everybody who's been, over the past 12 months for 52 fucking weeks have been hitting the streets every single week, standing up for justice and a free Palestine and calling out Israel's genocide for what it is.
I think I like it at the supermarket. Allow security to keep asking us to leave. We try too hard.
Meanwhile, slightly smaller stakes, but, just a quick recap of what's going on with the supermarkets over the last couple of weeks, because I feel like there's been things in the news. We haven't really got into them. Maybe it's time for a little bit of a roundup on, the government's war on the big supermarkets and how horrible it is for Coles and Woolies, etc. So little recap, Tom. We've got the ACCC's investigations, their court proceedings, and then government is moving on this mandatory code of conduct on land banking, and most recently this week on shrinkflation. How are you feeling about it? Are you feeling like grocery is going to be cheaper by the time you get back to Australia?
Oh my God. Once again, not to bring us back to the horrors of the Middle East, but it's like the contrast between...
Not to bring us back to the horrors of the Middle East, as I'm always saying. Sorry.
But the gap between... There's a fucking genocide happening right now, and don't worry, guys, I'm going to make sure that your
have
chips...
you noticed cereal boxes are smaller? My hamburgers are a little bit smaller now.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's on the one hand, yes, it's like, wow, it feels ridiculous after having just had that conversation. On the other hand, it is like food being so expensive is incredibly impactful to a lot of people in the country right now. We have this incredibly concentrated market where Coles and Woolies own 2/3 of the market, and they are able to drive up prices in such a way that, destroys the livelihoods of farmers in the way that they wield the power over them and other suppliers. And it also means that people are skipping meals. Parents are telling their kids that they've already eaten in order to put food on the table for them. This does, poverty is very serious, and it can destroy people's lives. And so this is it is a real thing that we need to... But it
Absolutely.
is true. It is like shrinkflation.
Yes. Anthony Albanese's flaccid actions in regards to this, impotent actions this, completely, out of proportion for the actual problem that we face.
Need to prescribe Coles and Woolies as terrorist organisations already. No. Okay. So the ACCC case, first of all, I think this happened the week before last. Are you across what's going on here? I feel like it's fairly simple because it's almost one of those things that everyone's like, oh yeah, we probably knew they were doing that, right? Like,
I heard the ACCC is taking them to court for ripping us off. That's sort of like the headline that I've taken from it. I couldn't tell you the details therein.
Okay,
but I assume Coles and Woolies are bad.
They
and
are bad.
ACCC is doing some good. Yes.
The ACCC has commenced separate proceedings in federal court against Coles and then Woolies respectively, saying that they misled shoppers. This is specifically about quote unquote illusory discounts. And that they would have sold millions or tens of millions of dollars worth of these products. And so they're seeking orders for pretty significant fines that would be a deterrent to stop other big companies from doing a similar thing. What they are saying that they did is they inflate the price of a bunch of products. They say that from what they've seen, 266 products they've seen Woolies do this for, and 245 products at Coles. They pump up the price. So the example they use is like Oreos. They go for a certain period of time, maybe like a couple of months, they put the price of Oreos up to $4 a packet, and then they put it up from $2 to $4. They then cut it down to $3 and go, save $1 was $4. You know what I mean?
Jesus.
So even though they've actually inflated the price, because they put it up for not even that, like it could like the particular point is that it's for such a short period of time, right? That they like put it up and then just put it down in order to look as though they're cutting prices. So there are the two programs that Coles ran. The Coles one is, the prices are down or down or whatever. and Woolies had an equivalent one. And like what's really insidious about it is that they point out that the products that they applied these fake discounts effectively to are staples for like low and middle income families. Like they're not higher end products. They're not things that would be more expensive. They're things like, you know, Kellogg's and Wheat Bix cereals, Moccona coffee, Sprite, toothpaste, Maggi, whatever, noodles, like these things that you know that average low and middle income families are going to be buying, and they're going to see and go, oh, maybe I will, like I'm going to get that. And maybe they would even then forego buying another product that was genuinely better value, or buying it somewhere else because they're like, I'm getting a bargain.
I love that. It was $4. Some arsehole priced it at $4. Can you believe that?
$4 for it, but we're not. Hey, we wouldn't do that to you. Not today. Not today. Coles has responded to this by saying we're going to defend ourselves, like we're going to defend this case. When we did it, when we put the prices up, everything was getting really expensive. There was inflation. The suppliers were charging us so much. Where? Woolies. I think quite funny in the wake of the Four Corners story where the Woolies CEO, Mr. Banducci, just completely shat the bed and looked absolutely horrific. Now, their PR strategy is just to be very, very quiet. And so they just didn't even really have a response, didn't have a comment. They were like, we're going to look into it. So that's Woolies' response so far. If the ACCC gets what they want in court, the fines could be it could be $50 million or 30% of the adjusted turnover for the company during the breach period that they were like doing the bad thing, which given Coles and Woolies have such significant revenue could be quite a lot of money. And they also, in addition to that, they're like, regardless of the fines, they should also set up a community food program where they provide meals for people in need. That's an order that they're seeking. Interestingly, it's not the first time that they've taken a case like this to court, apparently, not for supermarkets, but they did it for, now I can't remember who, but there was another industry where they'd done effectively the same thing. They increased the prices and then cut them a little bit and were like, we cut prices, aren't we good? So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, do you think, I don't know what these how successful these court processes usually are, like what the likelihood is that they'll get big fines or a good outcome from this?
Yeah, again, I couldn't say know heaps about it. I know there is a bit of a history of the regulators talking big. These are the big fines. These are the big figures that we're going for. Yeah. And then you end up settling, right?
Yeah,
and
they've got very good lawyers you
come back, you come to a relationship. Well, this is the things that we've extracted from them. Yeah, the law doesn't apply to these corporates like they do everybody else. It's like, well, it's kind of a vibe thing. We certainly saw that with ASIC, the financial regulator, the relationship between these regulators and the industry and the corporations that they're supposed to be regulating, extremely cozy, and they really do love getting to just these nice sweetheart deals at the end of it. I don't know. I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but I hope that doesn't happen.
It's a good question. I mean, talking about the relationship, the other thing obviously that the ACCC is doing separately or alongside this is they've got their ongoing inquiry that the government has commissioned them to do into prices in the supermarket sector. That was the one that they released. They recently released their interim report, so 27th of September, which was like last Friday, the Friday before last when we're releasing this. They released their interim report, and one of the things that they kind of reveal as part of this report is the fact that Coles and Woolies are very much refusing to cooperate with their investigations, and so they are having to use their powers of compulsion, which was something kind of unusual that the government gave them with this. So apparently it's the first time since 2008 that the ACCC has had compulsory information gathering powers to do something like this, which means they can compel the duopoly to give them data, which the Senate was unable to do and which they're using to find out lots of little things about the shit things that they're doing, and that they have been having to use those powers because otherwise Coles and Woolies are just refusing to give them anything. So I don't know, maybe the relationship is not so great, but yeah, we shall see. The interim report, I don't think it really told us anything that we didn't already know. The main kind of findings that they have released were that groceries are more expensive than they used to be. Groundbreaking stuff. Price of a typical basket of groceries has increased by more than 20% in the past 5 years, according to that interim report. They also found that consumers have lost trust in supermarkets. No, really? Also, they
Who had
mentioned
trusted them before?
Yeah, well, apparently this is the case, right? That brands like Coles and Woolies, maybe particularly Woolies or something, used to be one of Australia's most trusted brands, which is weird when you think about it. But it's true that their trust has significantly declined. They also mentioned loyalty programs and like membership programs, and that customers feel like they're being penalised for not being part of these programs because then you get special membership deals, which I do often hate those things. I'm not a member of any of those things. Do you do the programs?
No, but mainly out of laziness than anything else. I probably should.
Don't want to have
and
to
also,
deal
I
with
would
it.
just go to the nearest supermarket, whether that was Coles or Woolies. Now I'm pretty consistently going to one because it's near my house. So
me too. Yeah. They also found that obviously suppliers are getting screwed over, farmers are getting screwed over. We already knew that. They explicitly said, quote, supermarket retailing in Australia is an oligopoly because, Coles and Woolies account for 67% of retail sales nationally. By comparison, Aldi is 9% and Metcash, independent supermarkets, is 7%. I think we knew this. Perhaps maybe the most relevant point that's come up in the past couple of weeks, kind of a point of contention and that the government is now looking at, is this question of land banking. Interestingly, the interim report, or the statement that I read from the ACCC about this interim report, is actually like, oh, we don't know about land banking. So they say, we have received submissions raising concerns about alleged land banking, but have not yet formed any views on the issue. Information provided by Coles and Woolies suggests land may be held for lengthy periods of time for various reasons, including the need to obtain rezoning and development or planning approvals, construction delays, site cleanups, and population growth being slower than expected. So they're kind of like, hey, we don't know. There could be a lot of reasons that Coles and Woolies are just holding on to these sites in circumstances where potentially competitors could have got their little hands on them and increased competition in the sector, but we don't know. We don't know what that might be. They did say that from the data they've got, Woolies has interest in 110 sites that they could be using. Coles has 42. By comparison, Aldi has 13 undeveloped sites. I mean, they are land banking, right? Like, why would I'm curious to know why do you think that they're kind of hedging their bets on this one?
Population growth being slower than expected. So we're hanging on to this land and not developing it until more people move into the area to make it commercially viable. I mean, that basically is land banking as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're just holding on to this. That's right. It's like, well, then if you don't need it, like if this isn't needed, then you should have disposed of the land, right? Given it to someone, like let it be used for something that the need does exist for. Yes, maybe it's a question of how you define land banking and what's acceptable corporate conduct. And perhaps we disagree with the ACCC on this point. But the government is still going ahead. Like it says that it's taking action on land banking. So this week, one of the things that they announced was that the Treasury is going to work with the Council on Federal Financial Relations, which I guess is one of those state and territory bodies where they all get together and talk about what we can do in the state and territory levels, which is, of course, impossible when it comes to something like rent caps, as we all know. Unconstitutional Greens wanting to cap rents. They need to stop talking about it in federal parliament. Forget that for a second. Because they're doing, when it comes to loosening planning regulation, it is possible, folks. Anything can be done. So
that's crazy.
They are framing this as a solution to land banking. What they are doing is working together on planning reforms to, quote, increase competition. But rather than like an interventionist approach of divestiture or, forcing companies to sell land that they're not using, for example, it is very much a market-based approach about deregulation because relaxing planning laws is the solution to everything. What Albanese has said is, I think it is Albanese, I actually haven't attributed it, could be him or Chalmers. Anyway, one of them says, quote, the truth is that we have a market-based economy in Australia. We want to continue that market-based economy, but we want proper regulation to hold the supermarkets to account. That means nothing. What are you talking about? You're just kind of just signaling your neoliberal, ideology and being like, but we're going to maybe, I guess, loosen. Like what they're saying is, maybe they're sitting on the land because they couldn't get approvals to build, because planning laws are so restrictive, and this is also why we don't have enough housing and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, my understanding is that a lot of the sites that Coles and Woolies are sitting on are zoned for supermarkets. Like, I don't think it's just planning laws. And I think in the same way that developers use this as an excuse for why they are land banking and not delivering homes, and why, the housing crisis has exploded as it is, I think it's probably a little bit of nonsense, and it's not regulatory barriers at all.
So, but what do they mean increased competition? Because if you relax planning laws so that Coles can develop the supermarket that they're saying they're not developing at the moment because of landing laws, don't they still build a Coles supermarket and they still own a Coles supermarket? Isn't the issue that Coles owns lots of supermarkets?
Yeah.
And if you want to increase competition, you have to take it away from Coles and Woolworths because they're the ones that dominate 2/3 of the whole market?
Well, okay, so I think that and I think this is sort of what the ACCC is saying, is that, yes, we've identified that there are these barriers to smaller competitors entering the market. And maybe the point is that Coles and Woolies would have the resources or the power to navigate these planning and regulatory systems in order to secure the approvals that they need and to actually get the thing built, whereas smaller competitors might not. And so if you made those processes, if you streamlined approvals processes or zonings or whatever it was, then you would make it easier for the smaller players to get in and compete.
Okay, but this reform will in no way affect or change the fact that Coles and Woolworths have 100 properties that they have interest in they're hanging on to.
No.
To their benefit, it will just make it easier. If planning laws are a restriction on them developing these sites, it will just make it easier for them to develop those sites, and then they'll just have more supermarkets.
Yes. Because like what the Labor government still continues to even to consider in any way is any sort of divestiture powers or any sort of powers that would restrict the market share of Coles and Woolies. Like, as we know, this is what the Greens have been banging on about for ages now. We've got a bill before Parliament for divestiture powers, which would enable the ACCC to break up Coles and Woolies. We've proposed, like in Queensland, for example, proposed limiting market share and an authority that could force Coles and Woolies to sell some of their stores if they're hitting above that market share. The Nationals are on board with divestiture powers.
Agrarian socialism. Yes.
But no. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has labelled them Marxist, saying, this is what he said about the coalition. They want publicly owned energy through nuclear energy, and now they want, one would assume, publicly owned supermarkets, because if Coles has to sell, guess who will buy it? I forgive you if you don't understand what the fuck Albanese is talking about here. Sometimes he's saying, if you force Coles to sell, then just Woolies will buy it. But if we're saying that there is a limit on market share, which the solution would be, like that there's divestiture powers to stop them from holding a particularly high proportion of the market, then it's not just going to increase, like Coles or Woolies isn't going to just buy it up. But anyway. And then he's like, you want publicly owned supermarkets, which isn't the proposal, but just quietly, as I think we said before, interesting idea. I think we should investigate that, but that's just me. And then the publicly owned energy through nuclear energy, like, is he saying like publicly owned things in general are crazy? Why? Like, he's just looking for an in maybe to talk about nuclear, but him being like, you want publicly owned energy? What's next? Publicly owned supermarkets? It's like publicly owned energy is good. And we have it.
Labor governments at the state level are trying to establish those very things.
Yes. We just had Labor in Queensland recently. Like, we already have publicly owned generators. They've passed legislation to keep them publicly owned. They're very vocal about how good that public ownership is, and they just said that they want to bring back a publicly owned retailer, which, by the way, they privatised in 2006. Peter Beattie, Labor Premier, did that. But the Albanese's framing being like public ownership, crazy Marxism, like, is so... not only out of accord with what Labor governments are doing at state and territory level, but also out of accord with what the broad majority of Australians think, which is that privatisation doesn't benefit anyone except private profits, and that public ownership is a really good thing. Anyway, but no.
It's so good having someone from the Labor left leading the party in the country. It's so good.
It's so good. He likes punk music, remember? Everything's going to be great when he's Prime Minister. What do you think of this, Billy Bragg? You support this, Billy? Fuck. It's bleak. They won't consider divestiture powers. Instead, they're like, just loosen the regulations. That'll make it better. instead of considering any kind of intervention or restriction on the market, like you could do to tackle land banking, for example, by banning, you could do a vacancy levy across the board. You could also ban supermarkets from holding onto land for more than a certain period of time. In Queensland, for example, we've said 4 years. You could ban restrictive leases and covenants, like the restrictive leases like they've done in shopping centres where they say we're the anchor tenant and you can't have competing, like if there's a Woolies in there, you can't have a Coles, for example. That has somewhat been addressed through the courts, but it's still technically illegal. Restricted covenants where they buy the land and they put a covenant on the title saying that it can't be, used by a competitor even if it's sold in the future. That's still legal. We could ban any of those kind of practices. Yeah.
Fuck.
But no, instead, we just got to loosen up those laws, baby. Got to loosen up the planning laws.
Yeah, see, capitalism is all about competition and the free market, and you're allowed to compete in. And it's also about putting in legal structures that just apply protection to corporate giants so they can take over a monopoly of a market and make shitloads of profit.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. No, at the same time, Albanese is still trying, Labor is trying to be like, we're taking on the big supermarkets. So they say that they're doing these planning laws to address land banking. They have also allocated an additional $30 million for the ACCC to, I guess, do the next stage of its investigation. It's done its interim report. It's now got an extra $30 million to investigate misleading and deceptive pricing practices. It'll be doing public hearings. It'll focus on particular products and et cetera, do all of those things. They also have released the draft of their promised mandatory food and grocery code, which will apply to companies with turnover over $5 billion, and draft reforms to the Competition Consumer Act to increase penalties for breaches. The code itself, it's, the expected stuff, lawful and good conduct. It also includes protection for suppliers against retribution from the big supermarkets and strengthens dispute resolution processes, like the supermarkets have to appoint a mediator and all that sort of thing. But I think the code itself is not as important as the fact that they would be making it mandatory and they would be introducing these big penalties for civil breaches. I have to say I was a little bit confused because these penalties, I was tying myself in knots, and if anyone can just explain this to me easily, that would be fantastic. Maybe comment on the socials or the Patreon or something. But because I was like, well, the penalties that they're proposing are smaller than what the ACCC is saying that they could get through the courts. But maybe the difference is that they are saying they've breached consumer law generally, whereas what this is about is just for breaches of the food and grocery code without even having to prove that you've breached this law. So that's my understanding. But even so, penalties for just breaching this new mandatory code of conduct could be up to 10% of the previous year's turnover. So for companies like Coles and Woolies, we could be talking like $4 billion, which is pretty good.
Pretty nice.
Pretty good. So those are out for consultation. And then the other thing that we are talking about is, of course, shrinkflation. Later in the week, Albanese has done his little reel and he's like, things are getting smaller. What they are doing about this is changing the little labels that they put under products. So apparently there is already a unit pricing code. You know how it's like, this is $2.30 per 100 grams. And they'll introduce...
Never read that in my entire life.
That's so interesting you say that, because I was going to ask you to read it, because I always do. I look at how much they are per thing, and sometimes I find it quite informative, but I don't it's not difficult to read. Like, I find it's fairly straightforward. And the proposal being to, quote, improve readability and visibility of prices and address inconsistent unit measurements to improve comparison. And they might also expand who's covered, so then they might expand it to the little guys instead. So that's great. But
so just to put this in a tangible example that Albanese was talking about, he's like, have you noticed you get a packet of chips and you're getting less chips in the pack, but it's still the same price. Right?
Which is true. So this is something that,
it's a real thing that's happening. And so this reform would just change the labeling situation, which would
nothing
mean
about
that
them actually
doing it. Okay, so would you be like, oh, this unit pricing isn't priced very well. I don't like the pricing. They're ripping me off here. I'm going to go to a different supermarket.
Me? No, I just use it to compare if there's two items next to each other and I'm like, then I can go, hey, that box is bigger, but that one is smaller. And I can just, without having to do some sort of insane maths in my head, figure out how much it is per 100 grams, which is helpful. But I'm like, so we already have that. They're going to make it somewhat more readable. I don't know, what are the labels going to be? The font's going to be a bit bigger and the background's going to be white now. I don't know what difference that is really going to make. Stronger penalties for breaches might be the only thing. Like, if the penalties are genuinely enough for Coles and Woolies to not consider it just a cost of doing business. But even so, I'm like, I don't think they're not actually doing anything about shrinkflation, right? Like, this is so not an actual fucking thing because they refuse to make price gouging illegal. They refuse to introduce divestiture powers. They refuse to do something like capping grocery prices like we have proposed in Queensland. They don't want to actually do anything, and food will continue to get more expensive until they fucking do. Yeah, that's the last couple of weeks. I was going to say as well, we did do a bit more diving into the Four Corners episode and how fucked supermarkets are in episode 114. If you didn't listen to that, you can go back and listen to that if you want more. If you're hungry for more supermarket stuff, if you feel like this segment on supermarkets has been shrinkflated, you can do that.
Head to 114. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it very much. Call to action this week. I mean, we're just giving a shout out to the people who are hitting the streets and protesting for Palestine. In Naarm today at 12 p.m. at the State Library, you can go join lots of people marking 1 year of the Gaza genocide. Our existence in resistance. They tried to erase Palestine from the world, so the whole world became Palestine. Go along to that today. And all our New South Wales comrades, congratulations. You are having a rally. The police have allowed it.
Congrats.
And thank you for fighting the good fight. That's going to be starting from Hyde Park today, not Town Hall. That change of location was part of the negotiations for that. I'm sure there are lots of other rallies happening around the world and vigils as well.
Yeah.
Well, yes, every weekend, certainly, but also tomorrow, Monday the 7th, there will be vigils happening as well too. And yes, love and solidarity to everyone. Palestine will be free. And none of us are truly free until Palestine is. And please, if you're already a patron, make sure you listen to that episode with Nasa Mashni. And if you're not a patron, please consider signing up. I thought that was a fantastic conversation.
It is very good. If you'd like to support the show in other ways, apart from becoming a patron, you can also rate and review us. Give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. You can share our clips and follow us on social media at Serious Danger AU, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We also post the full video of episodes there. And come along to our live shows. You can find the dates, get tickets, and find all the other things at seriousdangerpod.com.
Bye.
Bye.
Serious Danger Australia.
Beautifully done.
Thanks, Tom.
Do not leave that in, Mike. Cut that out.